Okej, välkomna till Daniel Pargmans. Sorry, welcome to the seminar, but I wanted to make the Swedish point actually. If I would have been yet fylking, I would say äntligen, finally. We've been nagging on Daniel for 8 years at least within the department in order to finalize the Docent application, and it's finalized, it's accepted. This is the very final thing you do, and I've handed over 2 PhD students which I've supervised for 2 years or so, and now, Daniel, they are all yours.
Thank you.
So welcome to this Docent presentation, where Daniel Pargman will present his lecture with the title Complexity, System Thinking and Collective Intelligence and what's Stupidity. That's me.
Okay, thank you. Can I be heard on the internet also? And yeah, okay, great. So yeah, actually that is my first point before I start. I just want to ask, so here's the decision and it's signed by Decanus. So I already am a docent, right? It doesn't matter what I say now, it can't be taken away. Can revoke.
Stupid.
Yeah, I just want to check before to be on the safe side, you know.
Everything is possible.
Everything is possible. Yes. Okay, so let's hope for the best then. Also, I would like to say that there will be some time at the end for questions. And after this finishes, 3 o'clock, there will be cake in our kitchen 2 floors up for those who want to. Tårta. Yeah. There are lots of people on the internet too, but I actually think that I can see over there, and that's enough. There are so much equipment here. So the title, as well as these 12 questions, just show how undecisive I can be, because I'm not going to be able to cover all of it, but possibly half of them I will touch upon or talk about. And I thought that despite the fact that it's 2 o'clock sharp, I thought perhaps some people will be late, so I'm going to do like a short presentation of some current research or a research project that I work with together with Mario. And we have also our greatest fan here, Karin, who promotes us all the time everywhere and makes contacts. So I'm going to talk about that and then move over to something else, because perhaps there are some people who arrive late. And many of you, or some of you, will have heard about this. So I'm going to talk about how big are you? And this, I guess, a shout out to Ulrika if she's online, because she wondered how I would be able to answer that. Okay. But I will. So, this is my ex-colleague Björn Hedin's dog's favorite food. And actually, it's also my favorite dog food, because it has this on the back, which states how much food of this particular brand you need to give your dog, depending on how much it weighs. And the only thing missing then, the key here is like, so how many calories are there in 100 grams of this particular dog food? But helpfully they told me, so it's 254 kilocalories. So this is really interesting in itself. Like, you can see, for example, that a 50 kilo dog doesn't need to eat 10 times more food than a 5 kilo dog, which makes sense. So bigger animals are more energy efficient per kilo. The big dog only has 1 circulatory system and 1 heart and 10 of these dogs, they need a lot more energy to get going. Possibly a surprise actually to most people is that most of the energy actually isn't used to move, but rather to regulate the temperature, to maintain, like for us, 37 degrees temperature. Yeah. Okay, so you can then calculate how many kilocalories, and as well as kilowatt hours, which is another way to measure energy. So basically, you need to charge your 30 kilo dog with 1 kilowatt hour per day in chemical energy dog food. Yeah. Okay, so what about if you have a 5 kilo cat? And basically it's the same, you know. Again, most of the energy is for maintaining body temperature, so it doesn't really matter that much if you have a lazy cat or an active cat or so on. And I chose a 70 kilo dog here also, which you need to charge with 2 kilowatt hours per day, because it's the same for a 70 kilo human. Except that it isn't. So David McKay wrote this book like a dozen years ago or so. I think it's from 2009. I bought them, I can actually show them, I've read them. So he discusses how much the average Briton, middle-class Briton, like Englishman, uses in everyday life, doing whatever we do. And his answer is basically that we eat 2 kilowatt hours of food, but we use 200 kilowatt hours of energy in our daily lives. For example, heating this room and having the lights on and the equipment and internet and so on, so forth. A lot of it is travel, and you can rack up a lot of a big energy footprint if you fly a lot, for example. But basically, to illustrate this, this is the average Swede. He weighs 70 kilos, and I guess I have to... What do I do so this can be seen on the internet?
What is the link being used?
Well, I could turn on my camera. So tell me, Björn.
Yeah, now you are in focus.
Yeah. So this could be, let's say this is me. And I'm, the average Swede, perhaps 175 centimeters and weighing 70 kilos. And eating 3 meals per day to get the energy to move. Okay. So 200 times more energy. And this, I asked my son to help me. So this is my energy footprint. This is how big I would be if I had to eat all the energy that I use in my everyday life. So this guy, this Lego Colossus, is 7 times taller, 7 times wider, 7 times deeper. So it's basically 350 times the weight of this guy. 350 times the weight, 100 times the energy consumption of this guy. So basically, he needs to eat 300 meals per day. And then you need to be this big. And then you could discuss, like, where does this energy come from? Fossil fuels, wind, solar, hydro, etc. I'll put them here for just a second. But this is a way to illustrate. So this is our energy footprint. And this perspective sort of awakens a lot of questions. First of all, basically, this is us. Each one of us is that big. We're all Gullivers. And then the question is, one question that there's no discourse about it in society, but the question is, would it be okay to be this big or this big? Here's the little guy, by the way. Is it okay to be this big if we just exchange fossil fuels for renewables? Or is there a problem with the size in itself? 25,000 kilos is the weight of this guy. Is that a problem, or is it just a matter of phasing out fossil fuels and ramping up renewables? That's the first question. The second question is, this is the average Swede, but not all Swedes use the same amount of energy. So, to simplify, rich people use more or travel more, and poorer people less. So we're actually different sizes. Our energy footprint, we could do several Lego figures to show the richest 10% of the Swedes, the poorest 10%, or average Americans, or Bangladeshi, or whatever. So that's the second perspective that this sort of like compels us to think about. And then the third question is, so let's assume that this is too big, and if we are going to transform or move into a more sustainable society, we should decrease our energy consumption and our energy footprint. And then the question becomes, so how big should we be? What should we aim for? And that, of course, doesn't really have a clear-cut answer, but I've been thinking about it for some time, and I kind of feel drawn to the idea that this is the biggest mammal on land. It's a big elephant, and a big elephant can weigh 5,000 kilos. And 5,000 kilos, basically, it needs to eat 50 kilowatt hours of food every day to power its body. That's a bit more than 40,000 kilocalories. So perhaps we shouldn't be bigger than elephants. We use 200 kilowatt hours now in Sweden. This guy uses 50. So perhaps shrinking our energy footprint in a couple of decades to a quarter would be possibly sustainable, or that's something to aim for. Actually, 20 years ago, some people suggested that. They didn't talk about being as big as elephants, but they formulated a vision of a 2,000 watt society. So now we're talking about watt, not which is power. But basically, this elephant uses 2,000 watts every second, every minute, 24/7. And if we do it, we would use 50 kilowatt hours. So today we live in more like an 8,000 watt society. So that's the challenge ahead of us. All of this coming from this figure or awakened by questions that arise from this project. I'll put him away because now I've sort of given a chance for laggards to show up, and I will start to talk about other things. Okay, so this is my latest scientific paper. It has, you recognize like a title and abstract and so on. And perhaps now it looks a bit more like a paper. And I will shrink it because I'm going to do something with it. But before, I'll go off on a slight tangent because we'll go to the shrunk version soon. But I just want to point to this part, the analysis and discussion, and show you real papers and how I work with them. So here's the analysis and discussion part that I've highlighted, and I went back to a paper where I had different versions of it saved. So this is a paper that I wrote together with Vlad, who might be online listening right now. I don't know, can't see, but this is some earlier version, and the discussion is called discussion, and the analysis is called skill, rebound, and self-driving cars. So my point here is that this is a great scaffold. It creates structure and order. The analysis doesn't need to be called analysis, but I always start with that structure when I write a paper. And you can also go off if you know what you're doing, that's okay, but sort of taking decisions in relation to that framework. So this is obviously at an earlier point when it's not really finished. Here it says discussion starts with blah, blah, bridging what comes before with what comes after. And I just want to show this part because I saw that in the later version when it was finished, this remained. So now, here's the next, here's the next version, and this is still here, but the blah, blah, bridging has become a paragraph. So this was a paper we published 2 years ago. And this is actually what it looked like when it was formatted and looked neater. So this is not just my latest scientific paper, actually. It's like every scientific paper that I write here. But now we'll shrink it. And I told you, this provides a structure and some order in the process. And I'll put it in a box. That's also order and structure, and I'll call this order. And now that I've established that this is a scaffold, I'll take away the paper and we just remain with order. Okay, now I'll move on to something that Joe and Cecilia are familiar with, and it's the protocol for changing the secondment plan in an EU project. So secondments, that's sort of like short-term visits elsewhere. And when we applied, we hypothesized that we would, in this network, hire 15 PhD students, and they would go places, and some would come here and visit, and some would go elsewhere. But like half a year or 1 year or 9 months later, I don't remember, but then all the PhD students have been hired, Joe being here, and perhaps Joe has gotten to know some of the other PhD students, ESRs in EU lingo, and he might want to go elsewhere than what we imagined at an earlier point. And or just move it in time for some reason. And this 11 steps is the procedure for doing that. With 9 different persons need to be involved, including here the work package leader is happy with the justification and send the request to the coordinator for the supervisory board approval, which sends it to the training committee and then the project manager of the whole project, who then need to send it to the project officer in Brussels, who need to say, okay, he needs to go 3 months later or 6 months later to Denmark. And by the way, he doesn't want to go to this German site, but rather to the UK instead. And then if the Brussels project officer approves, then the whole consortium is informed and blah, blah. This is quite complicated. Is this order and structure, or is it something else? And I would suggest that it is something else. So we'll put it over there, and we'll put it in a box, and we'll call this box control. Then we do away with the protocol. Okay, so now we have order and control. And here's another picture of order and control. Working in the office from Information Payoff, the transformation of work in the electronic age by Paul Strassman from, he published it himself, it seems actually, like I didn't know that, from 85. So here's a control-oriented organization. And sometimes, I'm sure you agree, it sometimes feel like this is us, and that's me. And here are our customers up in the top corner. And we, of course, have a CEO and a vice president for School of Electrical Engineering. And then this middle level must be people with official functions at the school. For example, these are people I've interacted with lately, like head of the department, Henrik, who introduced me, and head of first and second cycle education, whom we had lunch together with, also together with Jarmo. And then I've been in a lot of contact with our economy person because we're working on an application, and vice, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this could be KTH. Probably designed by the same guy who did this, a computer programmer's view of office information flows. But the same office, if you ask the manager or the head of the department, this is what it looks like. All of these pictures are from the same book, by the way. And then the question is, so what is this? This is definitely not, this might be control, but this isn't. And it's hardly order. So let's put it in a third frame it, and we call this chaos. However, I just want to say, chaos has gotten a bad rap, but this chaos here is creative chaos. This is where new things happen. So we have order, and we have in the middle, and then we have control and chaos. You might ask if there's something else in this picture, and yes, there actually are 2 more. You don't want to go there, but on both of the ends, we have a Greek word for destructive chaos, which I don't know how to pronounce it, perhaps chamos, something, which is like nothing works, and that's just decay. But then I would suggest, so this comes from Hock, and there's an interesting story behind that guy. I actually developed or suggested that there should be something to there must be something worse or beyond control, where control goes overboard, which is like stasis, where nothing changes, it's deep frozen. That's my suggestion anyway. And what is interesting is that when we were at this EU meeting and someone else, a senior researcher in the UK, saw this, he actually said, is the purpose of this to make sure that nobody changes their plans? Because it's just absurd, he said. So perhaps actually it should be over there. It's sort of I don't know, it's an open question. This is control, or this is control gone overboard. I'm not going to have a long discussion, but it's kind of like this. I don't know if it's control or stasis, but it's someone with a huge need for control who has created the procedure for changing the secondments. Um, Okay, so we'll go back here and we'll skip the extremes because that we don't want to go there and we're not going to really talk about them. There's nothing interesting to gain from going there. So some organizations, they work here in the overlap of order and control, and that's a great place to be if you are maintaining the current status or if you manage or administer. So I don't know a better word. In Swedish, I would use the word förvalta. So it implies that you maintain and continue, but there's really nothing new happening. However, you can also go here, which is more like a network organization. And in the overlap or in the border between order and chaos or creative chaos, that's where change happens. So that's where innovation and development happens. So for some purposes, you want to be there. By the way, Ingmar, you could put the picture on I will go there some at different points. Anyway, so you have a tension between these two poles going. Order is great, but sometimes you need to go there, and sometimes you need to go over here instead to get things done or to get new things to happen. But what I find to be the problem is that it often seems like there's a magnet that sort of pulls us in the direction of control, which is where you go when you, for example, implement or invent new rules. Or new rules that amend previous rules, or rules that, So having new rules is a way to try to control. And that's good for maintenance or administration, but it's not good for innovation and development. You move away from that. While chaotic, which is the term between chaos and order, chaotic organizations, they operate on the border of chaos and order. And they don't repeat, but they rhyme and they improvise and they handle new situations. And I have to tell you then that this is a problem. I can feel this tension within myself. Because I have a large personal need for control. So I like to have control and be here in between order and control. But I realize that that's not where interesting new things happen. And one example is my slides today. Because they haven't moved a pixel. They've carefully designed so that they will slide into the next and it will sort of because I like it to look like that. To have control and make it look perfect. Okay, so that's just one example. And my talk also we're already at slide 49 actually. 22 minutes into the talk. So sort of this has all been planned in advance, right? Which implies that I'm over here. And it's not very strange because this is my docent lecture. I'm supposed to sort of deliver something. It's not like an open house, a town hall meeting where I want to hear your opinions about something. So I am in delivery mode now. And it might be appropriate then to be over here. And I could deliver the same talk for my next docent lecture or whatever, because I already have it prepared now. I'm in control and we're operating in the, at the edge of order or in the intersection of order and control here. But it's really painful and it's hard to move towards chaos because then you have to also open yourself up to the unexpected. And that is scary. For a teacher, for example, or I don't know, for a researcher, I guess you should go there because nothing interesting will happen otherwise. But it's still not easy. And you could think about what this means in our organization, what it says about our teaching and about planning a new course, planning a new program, or how we evaluate what we do, etc., etc. There are lots of procedures, how we evaluate the course we gave last week, or Or perhaps just how we solve problems in general, if we solve problems by implementing new rules, or if we do the opposite, whatever that is. Or what the opposite is to start with. What is the opposite of having more rules and trying to gain a tighter control? There's a magnet over there and it spawns new rules. And you should, of course, act according to the rules, but what if the situation is new and the rules don't cover it? What if the student population changes, or society changes, or the world changes, but we don't? That also makes us vulnerable if we are if we have a hard time innovating and developing our own activities. So there's danger also in always trying to go to the control side, or to the right side of this picture. This is excellent for solving problems that are simple. You can be in control and you can make it more efficient and so on. Order is nice for complicated problems like writing a scientific paper. I mean, that structure, it could be the structure of any paper. That's really powerful, but it's also restricting to have those headers. But, you know, to the left, you have chaos. And what does chaos look like then? So perhaps like this. Creative chaos. It might be that you did this picture and you suspect that it's actually too simple. It doesn't capture the full richness of this area that you're trying to map. What does this imply that you should do, this picture, and what does it imply that you should do if you think that this doesn't cover it? This is too simple. Like, what rules do you apply? How do you formulate rules to handle that? So now we have these three pictures here representing that which is simple, and that which is complicated, and that which is complex. And then you have a magnet also. And I had a question about stupidity. It was actually in the title. So I would say that perhaps then stupidity is believing that you can innovate and that you can increase the quality of what you do by increasing control. Well, especially innovating through. So I have to say, to innovate through regulation seems to be really hard, like impossible. Att reglera fram kvalitet, it seems like it's a wild goose chase. And stupidity then is also trying to control that which cannot or should not be controlled, whatever that is. To think that the problem you handle, that all problems can be solved here in the intersection of order and control. And one example then would be an interesting term, quality assurance, which sounds like it's a good thing to assure quality, but we don't really know what quality is. Like, what is a great course at KTH? Because there's no one answer, and we don't. This is a great course. So we want to give great courses, but how do you give them, or how do you encourage people, or how do you evaluate when it looks like this? And this might be too simple. So quality assurance, as far as I understand, and here I've been inspired by Swedish philosopher Jonna Bornemark. This is my book, and I haven't read it. I read the previous book, but I couldn't find it. So the previous book is called The Renaissance of the Unmeasurable, but this is a continuation. Horisonten finns alltid kvar. I don't think that they've been translated to English, unfortunately. So she talks on a page, 1 or 2 pages, about quality assurance. And her suggestion is that this is really bad quality here at the floor, and this is like unimaginable quality. And when you want to implement procedures for assuring the quality in some service, in healthcare or higher education or wherever, what you do is that, since you don't really know what constitutes quality, and what is a great course. What you can say is that this is really bad if you're down here near the floor. And then you define this as the minimum level of quality, and then you make sure that it's above there. And that is quality assurance. So what you've managed to do is to say that this doesn't suck, but it has very little to do with quality, except the name, of course. How do you find the maximum level? Well, quality assurance tools can't tell us anything about that because it's hard to define quality, and we don't. We haven't tried, as far as I know, and it probably wouldn't be a good idea in the first place. So we go for what we can measure, even though it's probably quite a bad idea. Can you capture quality in our rules and in our regulations? And here I would actually like to read. I spent so much time, like you heard, 8 years writing my Docent application. So I have a paragraph here, which I managed to sneak in at the very end, and nobody seemed to notice. So here it says, a few sentences only. Academic leadership has been compared to the task of herding cats. And despite the fact that such questions have been a long-term interest of mine, I have to admit that I'm still undecided about the appropriate balance between top-down line organization and bottom-up creative self-organizing research groups. So since I wrote this, I have decided what I prefer. Okay, so I have read up on what characterizes creative environments, for example, creative scientific environments, reference, and also read a lot about the perils of new public management and admin society, reference. And I lean towards, here's the controversial part, so I lean towards believing that KTH and Swedish higher education currently is over-regulated and over-administered. That is, sharing several well-known problems with Swedish healthcare, public education, etc. It sometimes seems like we have perfected our processes at KTH to such a degree that they become nearly unworkable. For example, recruiting new faculty, a process that can be so rigorous and slow that other faster universities snatch up our best applicants. At other times, there seems to be broad agreement that something doesn't work, but actual change is exceedingly hard. And that is because it's hard to change things by creating new rules or trying to enforce current rules or, and so on. Stuff that I've talked about here. Which picture is this? Yeah, okay, I think I know which next is. So I think it's management guru Peter Drucker. Yes, so he has said, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. And this is something you can mull about a bit. This is where we are doing things right, which then would be according to the rules and regulations, but perhaps we're not doing the right things. That is, and we don't know if we're doing the right things here, but that's what you explore here. You explore the possibility of things to do, and you choose better rather than worse, aiming for the right things. That won't happen by trying to optimize on order and control. Or I would even go as far as to say that it can't happen over there. Peter Drucker has also said, I like this quote too, there is nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all. Perfecting our processes to such a degree that they become nearly unworkable, for example, would be an example of that. Basically, at the intersection of order and control, you can sort of like hit the target but miss the goal. You do everything by the book, but still you fail. And actually, I should go back here and say, I forgot a couple of things in here. So what this here implies, what all of this implies, that it's something that is counterintuitive, at least to Swedes, I think, and that is that rules are not necessarily your friend. because they can make things worse also. They can make things better and they can make things worse. They can stop you from doing the right thing. So efficiency is doing things right, and effectiveness is doing the right things. And the rules can stop you from going here and exploring what the right things are. So if the world is in chaos, you can't cling to the rules, and then you sort of need to think on your feet and roll with the punches and hit the ground running and blah, blah, blah. There are lots of cliches. You know, you need to adapt. And I was thinking of two examples here. So one is the tsunami 2004, where Sweden did things according to the book and nothing worked because they needed to act quickly. But, you know, they were asleep and it was closed in the weekend and there was a wave, and other countries did things quicker and sent planes and help to their citizens, and we didn't, because we were doing things by the book. We were doing things right, but we weren't doing the right things. And I'm not really going to go there, but you could, of course, also think about how we and other countries handle COVID. You know, were we doing things right? Were we doing the right things? How were we exploring these tensions and questions? And, you know, were we successful? Weren't we? Which is a hard question. Okay. So, now I will move on to this great book I read. Some of you are laughing, I don't know why. Well, it's because it's not really, it's a book that I read, but it's also a book that I wrote. This is my PhD thesis. So I have it here. I have extra copies, and you can buy them with a discount here. You know, just telling, it's not very recent though, but still worth reading. But I was looking at the virtual community, an online community, an online meeting place, a virtual community, whatever. The word community is twice in the title. It's both code begets community, and there's also social and technical aspects of managing. Oh, by the way, I'm not. I have a computer science background, but I did my PhD in communication studies, with a specialization in human-machine interaction, but this is not a computer science PhD thesis, it's more a social science PhD thesis. And I looked at this community, and I was totally, I didn't know how to handle it when I came there, because these people are actually this is the guy who created this online community and this virtual world, and these are his right hand, or arch magicians, and there were about 6 of them. And his name in the game was God, because he created the world. And they were archmagicians. They had different names. There's only one woman, which is sort of the gender balance among the archmagicians. And it's also computer programming, collaborative, sort of open source, you name it, project. But they were amateurs. They were just like, he started this when he was a student at Linköping University. And that guy was a student, but in Stockholm, and you know, he started to work at, I don't remember which funding agency, and he's a computer consultant nowadays, and so on and so forth. But this is what they did when they were students. And I went there, and I wanted to study this virtual community, and one of my first questions was like, so what are the rules? Like, what is the law here? And they were like, we don't have any rules, or we don't have a lot of rules. So they actually had some rules. I think it was 6 or something like that, after having done this for some years. Because you know, their interest is not in creating rules, but rather in programming and having fun and creating an adventure game and so on. And the only reason why they created rules at all was because there had been some conflict about, or some discussions about how things should be managed, and they were forced to create a rule to regulate, or like after they had a conflict, they needed to make sure that it didn't happen again. That's when they created a rule. And this was very strange to me, and it took a long time before I even understood what they were doing. It's like, people were socialized into becoming archmagicians, and during that process, which could easily take a year or 2, they sort of learned the ropes by hanging around. And you know, in the best case, you didn't really need rules, because you would have been socialized into this community of practice, or you know, so that you would share beliefs in what is good and right in this particular place. For example, this was a Swedish-speaking online game. So they wanted Swedish mythological creatures and so on. They didn't want volcanoes, and they were so about pizza. Kind of like they wanted to have a Swedish language and Swedish content. And that had become a rule then, to sort of guide people that to what kind of content they should create. And it really took a long time for me to even get it. I mean, like, I wanted the rule book, and I thought there would be many, so that people would know what was okay to do there. And they didn't have any. And only later did I realize that, they're not the only ones who doesn't create more rules than they need. This is a book that I read. To my surprise, I write in the book when I read it, and I read this after I wrote my PhD. I would have thought that I read it before. So this is called Order Without Law, How Neighbors Settle Disputes. And I would never have read this, of course, unless I had an interest in this topic, because see here, this is about cattle ranchers in Northern California and how they regulate conflicts and so on. And like, going to a court would be the last resort here, because they try to figure things out by, talking to their neighbors or talking to the community or whatever. The whole book is about how you settle disputes without any rules or without law. They still have order, which is kind of similar to this book. Some of you, that doesn't matter here. Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, the fake Nobel Prize, it's not, there is no Nobel Prize in Economics, but, the honorary prize in economics. I have to say that because I think that they are just smooching off the reputation.
Like
yeah. Governing the Commons, the Evolution of Institutions for Collective Action, and that is, I guess, a pretty boring title, but it's an interesting book because she writes about how communities handle themselves autonomously. Some people think that it's hard for people to rule themselves or to agree. She has gone around the world and looked at studies of how communities manage to handle scarce resources like fishing waters or pasture for cows or forests or water for irrigation. So she has looked at successful cases, and the oldest are in Switzerland, like 500 years or more, for how to handle cows and pasture and mountains, not to overgraze is their challenge, okay? And she writes why they work and how they work without resorting to a rule of law. And the last book is an anthropologist, The Ritual Process, about structure and anti-structure. And Turner says that you can have, often through rites of passage of different kinds, when you go from being a boy to a man, or a woman to, or perhaps from a young woman to a mother, or to marry, or when people die, and these are rituals. And he says that there can be a sense of community that is based on comradeship and acceptance and homogeneity and equality when you level people through a ritual. And here's the interesting thing. He says, however, it is the fate of all spontaneous communities, actually he uses a specific word, communitas, which means something, but let's say, it is the fate of all spontaneous communities to undergo a decline and fall into structure and law. So structure and law to him is a failure of regulating things without structure and law. Structure and law is what you have to resort to when other things don't work.
So sorry to interrupt, Daniel. I need to just ask. You've been speaking about control, and is anything of this spontaneous, or has it all been planned beforehand?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll get back to that in a short while. I have a few more slides actually to show, so there will be time for questions. Here is a great graph from Joseph Tainter. This is another book. He's an anthropologist, and he wrote about the collapse of complex societies, and he says that this is the story of all societies, all complex societies in human history. And it might be the fate of us too, and that is that you increase societal complexity, and at first you have a great payoff You increase complexity a little and you get a lot of benefits. But there's a decreasing returns of increasing complexity. And complexity also costs. So you continue to increase complexity, here tripling it, but you only get a marginal extra utility or benefits. So you spend a lot of resources increasing complexity, for example, through having more rules. And I was thinking a decade ago or so, we had this storm in Sweden, which fell lots of forests. And to increase level of complexity with very little benefit would be to say, oh, this is a once in 100-year storm. I think we should have a 100-year storm department of, we should have a governmental agency that will handle once in 100-year storms. That would cost a lot, but there would be very little benefit, obviously. But it's actually even worse. When you have a lot of complexity, increasing it further will have few gains, and here you hardly gain anything at all. But what he says is the reason why societies and civilizations collapse eventually is because you can continue to increase complexity, while the benefits actually start to decrease. Yeah, so this is problematic. Here, you just increase the complexity more and more, you spend more resources, and you get less in absolute numbers. This is what makes, according to him then, civilizations collapse. Okay, so I have 2 slides, 3 perhaps. This is a recent book about digitalization and sustainability, and in this book, these German professors, they suggest that we should think about not just efficiency but also sufficiency, and they suggest that we should talk about data sufficiency, which is as much data as necessary but as little as possible, which I thought was really intriguing. So here's my first attempt then at trying to define admin sufficiency or rule sufficiency. So here I have 2 suggestions, which this is sort of wrapping things up. Perhaps you should strive for having as much administration as necessary, but as little as possible. That's a proposal. Or as many rules as necessary, but as few as possible. And the question obviously becomes, is that where we are here? Or should we simplify? Or are there additional benefits of increasing complexity here at KTH? Or have we already passed the peak over there? Yeah, so I'm going to go back here to this picture and say again, I said that this is a problem for me personally because I have a large need for control. And I mentioned my slides and my talk. It's nice to be here sometimes. Like if I'm going to report grades, I don't want to invent the structure. I like routines and like a clear interface. And I don't want to. Routine tasks should be should be controlled. A lecture like this, what's the balance between order and control? This has been very controlled because I've been talking all the time and you haven't been able to interrupt me hardly, So it makes it easy to package this lecture. I could give it again, or it could be recorded. Perhaps next time I do my docent lecture, they just need to show the recording instead. If it's a one-way communication, I can package it and just throw it to you and hope that you get something out of it. Like a conduit metaphor, a tube between me and your head. So this is one way of delivering educational content. But it also makes the classroom very easy to be replaced by Zoom, for example. Because it's one way, so if I do it one way here, why not do it over Zoom? But if you open yourself up to the unexpected then, which is painful and hard, that would allow for surprises or perhaps even magic to happen in the classroom. And it makes it meaningful to be in the classroom if you can manage to make that happen. And it makes it really hard to replace the classroom by Zoom. And I'll actually read just another thing from my docent application where I say, so while COVID restrictions and Zoom teaching has been an interesting challenge, the fact that some now believe that much or all education could be moved online without any detrimental effects on the quality of teaching and learning is, in my opinion, a rash conclusion. A bit hasty. I'm moderated here. The fact that some teaching easily can be moved online might say less about the general quality of Zoom education and more about missed pedagogical opportunities of ordinary routinized campus-based teaching and learning. If there is little difference between an activity on Zoom versus activities in a physical classroom, it might very well be the case that we have not utilized all affordances that co-presence in a classroom has to offer. So basically, if we can be replaced by Zoom, then what we do in a classroom sucks. To be less to be more outspoken. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'd like to. Before I end, actually, I'm going to go back to this and say, I have worked on the assumption for quite some time that where rules enter, common sense exits, because you don't need common sense any longer when you have rules to rely upon. And where rules enter, judgment and personal responsibility also exits, and agency. Like, if I follow the rules, nobody can say that I did a bad job. Even if the rules are stupid and the result is bad, I followed the rules and I can't be, nobody can say anything. If I break the rules to make something better, I can be punished. That is a problem. Okay, so there's little time for questions, and I'm going to suggest a specific structure. So there's only 8 minutes left, and I would like people who are online. I will give you 1 minute, and I will time it with my. So I will give you 1 minute to think if you have a question, and people online. So please listen up. You can write your question, but don't hit return until the minute is over, and I'll tell you. So please formulate your question online, but don't write it yet. And if you have a question here, think, and the minute starts now. Okay, so 1 minute is over, and so I'd like you to pose your questions online at the same time, and I'll 3, 2, 1 now, but I'll not look at them for the moment, but instead I'll ask if anyone here has a question. Okay, I will allow Lina.
Has any of this been spontaneous, or has it all been planned in advance?
That sounds suspiciously like a question I heard recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. That's really a great question. So now I will demo a technology that we have at KTH, and I will freeze time in this room, just like in Matrix. So the people, I'm talking to you guys online, they won't be able to hear or say anything for a minute now. And I tell you, this is just like from teacher to other teachers. It's great to say that's a great question when you have the first question, because that makes Elina feel nice. And all the people here think that they've accomplished something even though they didn't ask that question. And it's easier for other students to ask the next question. So that's really great. And now I'll go back to, yeah. So could you repeat your question?
Has anything of this been spontaneous, or has it all been planned in advance?
Yeah. Okay, that is a great question, and it deserves a great answer. And in order to answer that, I would like actually to ask you, like, so could you say something about why you ask, what were you thinking, or like, do you have a specific reason?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've been talking about control and chaos and everything in between.
Yeah.
And have you then been in any kind in chaos now, or only in order?
Yes, have I? Yeah. Have I been in chaos and innovation, or has this all been controlled?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that you had a question, Arjun.
Concur with that question and ask, you still note that you still haven't answered the question. And I also wish to ask, where does stupidity figure into all of this?
Yeah, I talked about stupidity before. And I have to say that Six Silberman, who might be in Germany, is asking, has anything in this lecture been planned? It seems rather jumbled. And Lina in Linköping, or Norrköping perhaps, says, you mentioned in the beginning of the lecture that you like to be in control. And I would like to know, is anything of this spontaneous, or was it all pre-planned? Yeah, this is obviously a difficult question. So obviously, I have one more book here which I really like, Irving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. So not only should you say this is a great question, if you have a difficult question you can say like, oh, we don't have time to answer that, but I'll give you an answer next week. That is a possibility. But it's also a matter of how I present, we all act, and how do I present, like, I can say like, that's a really good question, but then is this spontaneous? Or did I plan to pretend to think deeply about your question? Yeah. And I guess here, so I have to move to this because it's so cool and I haven't really gone here. But so the question is like, have we been here or here all this time? And I don't exactly know the answer because a lot of it has been planned, of course. So that's a huge degree of control, including through mind transmission, having people ask the same question, which is quite amazing. My powers are amazing, right? Yeah. So what was the question? Let's see. Is any part of this spontaneous, or has it all been planned in advance? Yeah, but here's the problem for me then. Because now I'm telling you, I'm spilling my beans, I'm telling you my secrets. So I open up now for the unexpected. So perhaps we're here. Or we're, I don't know, like, are we there? Are we there? Are we in both or in between? And I actually would like to ask Professor of Applied Drama, Eva, who must have worked with these things for so long. Do you happen to have like a suggestion? Because,
I have.
Yeah, please tell us.
Why is this question important?
For me or for the world? Or?
For everyone.
Because here is where innovation and novelty happen. Here's where you grow as a person. Here's where you administer and control.
Yes, but you pose it like it's discussed here as a question of fact. Mm-hmm. Was it or wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And I find that rather not so interesting.
No.
I don't know why you have this question really, because for me it's obvious that it's a mixture of preparation, planning, and spontaneity, of course, in the moment. So to me that specific question isn't so interesting really.
Did you notice how I stood? I'm also sort of projected like thinking, but yeah. That's actually really interesting, Eva.
And you also posed me as a professor, which matches your attitude maybe.
It does? Why?
Well, I don't know. You did it.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, it's a luxury to have a professor of applied drama here, because I was thinking, like, you have the key here, because I don't know myself where we are, so this ends in confusion, but perhaps that's something that I leave you with that we can think about then, and you can grow. Like, this is where innovation and new ideas happen, but it's scary to be here. And I managed to open up to this in the end. I mean, this is a one-way lecture. It's being recorded even. I don't know what people who look at it in hindsight will get out of this, but I find these things really interesting. And so I'm going to end It's 3 o'clock exactly. So me and some other people here, actually, Elina and Arjun and Minna and Axel, we took a 3-day course in November about the art of hosting, harvesting conversations that matter. And this model came from that course. I only saw it a couple of months ago. But obviously it fits with other things that I've been thinking about for a very long time. Like already when I was a student in Uppsala with Søren, for example, having these discussions. And we would like to dare ourselves and to help each other to go here and to not feel restrained, but rather to try to keep the rules that we want to and that supports us, but sometimes forget rules that doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's where we're heading right now. And we will explore this in the coming years, hopefully in our perhaps new master's program that might start in September 2023. So that's for all you guys online. Like send your students over here if they want to do sustainability and ICT 1.5 years from now. So with that, I'd just like to thank you that you came here. There's cake in the kitchen, 2 floors up. And thank you all for showing up. Sorry?
You hope.
I hope. I hope. Yeah, we don't know. It's been planned, but who knows? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Johnson. I am the head of the Docent committee. So this is now in a difficult situation. I'd like to just explain to you, if we didn't have that introduction, that the Daniel has now passed an important test here at KTH. This was previously called the lärarprov. So this used to be a real test. It's not anymore. Now Daniel was already pre-approved. I think that's a very good evolution, that you don't get the docenture for a single moment of performance. But Daniel has demonstrated scientific as well as pedagogical skills in the process leading up to this moment. And therefore I would like to present to you, Daniel, this Docent bevis. And here I confer this to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the department, the division, and all of your colleagues, and especially Anne, who couldn't be here, and myself, who has, both of us have nagged you.
Encouraged.
Encouraged, yeah. I thought I nagged, but encouraged, yeah, okay. For more than 8 years. Even
but who's counting?
I am, actually. And finally, thank you very much for filing the application and finalizing this lecture. I'm not unsure if I learned anything about sustainability during this last hour, but hope so.
Yeah.
Okay.